Thank you for visiting the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast, where we share the big and most interesting cycling stories from across the continent of Africa and from around the world where African cyclists are racing and riding.
Welcome to a special edition of the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast. Today we'll be talking about the 8 stages of this year's Tour de Rwanda, along with our predictions for stage wins, GC, King of the Mountains, Sprint Jersey, team classification and much more. Thanks to our friends at Pro Cycling Stats, we have all the data needed to discuss this year's Tour cyclists, but of course, focusing on the African riders. This is the 18th year of the Tour of Rwanda, and we have our CEO, Kimberly Coates, joining the podcast today. Welcome, Kim.
Hey, everybody. I'm so excited for this episode. I love slicing and dicing data and looking at all the riders. And we have a really strong African field this year, so it's going to be an exciting race.
100%. Well, you are a Tour de Rwanda veteran, Kim. Beyond Africa Rising's early work back then as Team Rwanda to get the Tour of Rwanda even registered with the UCI initially, talk us through how it felt to get the race on the UCI calendar to start with and the stress that must have been brought with commissaires and all the new rules and regulations that must have brought.
All I can say is when we say steep learning curve, it was the steepest. It was the Alpe d'Huez of learning curves because I didn't know what I was doing with the team. We were training commissaires, we were training race staff. Thankfully at that time we had GSO that was running the event. So they were instrumental in making sure that it came off. And, it was an exciting event. Team Rwanda did not win that year, but we all learned a lot. And it really set the stage after the event. I remember talking to Minister Habaneza and the federation president, and everybody was thrilled that, Rwanda was putting something on the map on the African continent. And that's really what led to the World Championships in Rwanda.
There's some big names that have kind of gone through Tour of Rwanda and moved on to big things like Biniam Gamai and guys like this. And we spent a few days now diving deep in Pro Cycling Stats data, which is an incredible website. And since that switch to 2.1, one of the things we've really noticed is the performance of the Eritreans in this race. It really is stellar. There's been 7 editions since 2019. They've won 4 of them, with movie stars Nathaniel Tetsvatsian winning 2 and 1 each for Burgos Berpelet's BH's Mahawi Kudus and XDS Astana's Henok Mulibran. Henok then came second by 6 seconds in the highly controversial finish last year when the final stage was abandoned. And looking at the start list for this year, there's 11 Eritreans, but they've got to be favourites for best African performance, I think, and maybe even a second win for Henok or Mahawi.
And we actually caught up with Mahawi after his training ride last night, and this is what he had to say.
Yeah, we are arrived yesterday here in Rwanda, Kigali. About Tour of Rwanda, my preparation was okay. My last race was Oman last week, and on stage 3, I had crash and I have a couple sore pain a little bit, so I was stopped for a few days in the bike. Just my main focus was to be recovery. So lucky I'm here, and it's not fully recovery yet, but soon I'm gonna be recovery. And our national team is a very strong squad here, so we are ready for the battle.
What do you think, Kim?
I think Eritrea having 11 riders, both fielding the national team and adding these pro riders to their national team, is really making a statement about that they're coming to win.
So let's have a take a look at the course and some stats and what we can glean from the start list. So just giving you some highlights. It's an 8-stage race this year. It's running at just under 1,000 kilometers. It's 993.5 kilometers. Stage 5 is an 82-kilometer circuit in Rubavu in the western part of Rwanda. Interestingly, there's no prologue this year or time trial, but we will see the famous Murder Kigali at the end of stage 7 after a pretty long day in the saddle. Just a note on that. I mean, it is one of the key TV highlights, I think, when people see the riders coming up, Murder Kigali. Got the Côte de Kimihurara. That was in the World Championships course back in September. They'll be going up that 3 times on the final stage next week. So that's a pretty serious day. One of the probably the most significant innovation for the course is the introduction of time bonuses, both at the stage finishes and the intermediate sprints. For those of you who know European racing, this is pretty common, but these incentives are very new, and they're not things that we've seen before at Tour of Rwanda.
I just noticed too that the Tour of Rwanda will be broadcast live on their YouTube channel. So hopefully you'll get to see some of these riders in action. And we'll put that link in our show note.
When you say the phrase World Tour Development Team, it sounds kind of very cool. But then when you look at those teams in themselves, and they are basically just continental teams, fighting it out across Europe at these races. So as you say, we don't know many of these riders. One rider, actually, looking at the list, we do know a guy called Zach Marriage from Australia. He's on the NSN development team, and we actually met him in very rural Benin last year. He was racing for the 7-Eleven team. And there was an amazing moment. He won't mind me saying this, but he's a slightly light-skinned Australian, and he was hiding under a tree from pretty intense heat in Benin. And I think there were about 40 to 50 local kids just surrounding him as he sat there in his kit. And I spoke to him and I was like, "How you doing, buddy?" He was like, "This is just amazing." So he really opened his eyes to Africa. And I spoke to him yesterday, and he's really excited about coming back. And I think he was the time trial champion in Australia 2025. So he's got the chops. So I'm looking forward to seeing him race for NSN, and maybe, the next couple of years you'll see him racing the Biniam on the senior team.
You made a really good point. I'm glad you brought this up, Jeremy, is that we are now starting to see young riders that are from Europe, the Americas, and even places like Australia come to events like the Tour of Benin or the Tour of Rwanda or other races in Africa and cut their chops on some of these races. We heard from somebody on the Eritrean team that the course seemed pretty flat, which when we say pretty flat, it's a very relative term because Rwanda is so hilly. They call it the land of 1,000 hills. If you haven't heard that phrase already after the World Championships, and those of you who watched the World Championships saw how brutal some of the climbs were. But even too, looking at the course over all the different years, it really is relatively flat for Rwanda. Still a climber's course. How do you think it's going to affect the riders, the African riders who are climbers, the real intense climbers like the Rwandans, Ethiopians, and Eritreans?
It's an interesting decision by Rwanda. I mean, if you think about Rwanda designing the course for the world champs, and it was the hardest, I think it's either the hardest in history or the second hardest in the history of the world champs. Rwandans like to climb, and that's their thing. So building a slightly more flat course, it's going to be fascinating to see how those local guys do, because like the Eritreans are climbers, the Ethiopians are climbers. So it's going to be a real mix. And I think honestly, it plays into the hands of someone like Henok again, because we know he can climb, but that guy's got a sprint. Like, he's had a couple of races this year when he's really shown he can hold a sprint.
I think about somebody like a Paul Miro who hasn't had a lot of racing, or a lot of the African riders, especially outside the Eritreans, haven't had the race time this year. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see them get better after every stage. And so it could get really interesting in the latter stages if they can keep the GC contenders within reach. Let's talk a little trivia about, and I love this story because I was thrilled to see Merhawi Kudus back, and he's always one of my favorite riders. I've known Merhawi since the very beginning. It was the GC winner. So he won the Tour of Rwanda back in 2019 after it became a 2.1 race. But a lot of people don't know his history with the race. So he was racing for JP Van Zyl back in 2010, 11, 12-ish. And he won stage 1 at the Tour of Rwanda at 18. So so he was racing with JP in the UCI World Cycling Center South Africa team. And he took the yellow on stage 5, which was the Mahanga to Musanze stage, which is a pretty hilly stage,
Yeah.
pretty mountainous stage. And he was only 18 that year, but there was some rule that I don't remember all the details behind the rule, but JP came to Jock and said, "We have a problem." And I don't know if Merhawi even knows what went on behind the scenes because, of course, you never want to tell your rider any bad news when they're sitting in yellow. But JP said, they're not going to let Merhawi race tomorrow because he's only 18, even though he had done all these other events. And JP said the only way the commissary is going to let him race is if he gets a call from Pat McQuaid. And Pat McQuaid authorizes it. And so Pat was a huge fan, huge supporter of African cycling. Jack just rings up Pat McQuaid. He was in Ireland, probably sitting at a pub. And he's like, Jack explains the situation. He's like, Jack, let the boy race. Like, done. So he calls the chef de jury. And the next day, the chef de jury comes up to JP and he goes, I got a call from Pat McQuaid.
Amazing story.
Yes.
I spoke to Maui earlier and he had a crash recently, so he's kind of coming back from that as well. Let's have a look at the rest of that. You talked about the Eritrean national team, so yeah, let's have a little look at that because it's a really fascinating squad. So there's 2 young guys on there, Nathan Medhani and Yafyet Mulugeta. Nathan's a little bit older. He finished 27th in the GC last year at Tour of Rwanda, 34th at the Tour of Sharjah recently. But then alongside them, you've got Nahom Zerai. And Nahom's a guy that doesn't get much PR that often, but he's the reigning Eritrean national champion. When Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but to be the Eritrean national champion in Africa is a pretty top thing to do when you look at the group of riders that go to that race.
That's legit. That's legit.
Any other Eritreans you think we should talk about, Kim?
So glad to see that Bike Aid is at the Tour of Rwanda for multiple reasons. What they have contributed over the years has been instrumental to Rwanda's success. So I know they weren't on the initial roster when they announced teams, but they were added. So super grateful that they're there. They have 2 Eritreans, Yol Haptib and Evan Yamani, and they're both solid riders and they're young. It's definitely a possibility with those guys. Bike Aid has been a staple to African cyclists over the years. They've had riders from Kenya, Uganda, Algeria, Rwanda, and Eritrea. So it's great to see Bike Aid in the mix.
We'll put a link on the bio actually because they sell their Africa jerseys to their fans and that funds a couple of scholarships that we have it running with them, don't we, Kim? And you've got one young rider you might want to give a shout out to who's on one of those scholarships. So he'll probably be there at the race.
3 African riders have scholarships, and one of those is in Rwanda, Jonathan Rafiki Muyamana. And he is the son of Rafiki Uyimana, one of the original 5 members of Team Rwanda and a mechanic. I think Rafiki is doing neutral support this year.
Yeah, it's amazing what they're doing. I think, if I'm right, it's over 25 African riders that have been through Bike Aid. The other thing we'll shout out for Bike Aid is sadly Nahom Ephraim, who is their 3rd Eritrean rider on their squad. He was the guy, if you haven't seen him race, you remember Sige Kase Kiros from Ethiopia lit up the women's junior race at the World Championships. Nahom is the Eritrean that lit up the men's junior race. Came 11th overall in the end, but was just attacking and absolutely looked like he belonged. Bike Aid have secured his contract for this year, but he's had some passport issues getting out of Eritrea, so he is not going to be racing Tour of Rwanda. But we hope to see him race soon. But shout out to them to have those 3 Eritreans on that team. There's another 4 Eritreans in the race. So the Istanbul team under the tutelage somewhat of Nathanael Bahan. And it still staggers me to see that he's only 34 after after career in the World Tour, which has gone on for a decade or so. He was second in Tour of Rwanda GC 2010, had a stage win at the race as well, but obviously spent a lot of time at World Tour and the top level of cycling. So he's there to kind of coax that Istanbul team. Alongside him, slightly younger, is, you mentioned him before, Metkel Eyal, known as the Professor, probably just because he wears glasses, but he's known to be one of the smart guys in African cycling. He was second in the GC back in 2017, 5 stage wins at Tour of Rwanda. So he knows what he's doing at this race. And those two, sort of the two senior riders, are looking after some of the younger guys. I'll just talk about a little bit because he's a friend of mine, and I've worked with him for 3 or 4 years now. He's just 23, really strong climber. He's the U23 Continental African champion from November in Kenya. He was second in 2025 on stage 5. Probably not as happy about the lack of like serious climbing. And then rounding that, as we mentioned, Maweo Girmay, brother of obviously the great Biniam Girmay. And he's due his breakout moment. He was on Intermarché's development team last year. He's a bigger guy, and he's got a good sprint in him. So we might see him do something as well.
Let's talk about the home team for a minute, Rwanda. Rwanda has not had a stage win and a notable result for a long time now. So it's definitely overdue. I know that they want to have the performance this year. And, if the riders are in good shape, that could happen. The one thing that they're facing is they haven't had a lot of racing. Luckily, some of them did get to go to the Tour of Sharjah. But we'll see, because I think Rwanda adding the sprint points knows that maybe some of their riders can succeed there. Probably my highest pick for Rwanda is Samuel Niankuru, who's 23. He's on Team Imani, and he's probably the best shot for Rwanda. He's fresh off Sharjah, where he got 7th in the GC. So that was a legit result at the beginning of the year. So he's definitely somebody to watch. Then you have Vankar, and I'm going to totally obliterate his name, Masengeso, 24, who's on Benediction Ban Africa. He's also a potential stage winner. Long shot GC finisher. He was 7th at the Tour of Rwanda last year. The big question mark is that he hasn't raced internationally since September's World Champs. So, outside some local races, he might not have the race legs in. And the youngster of the group, which, interestingly enough, not counting Maystars because we don't have their start list yet, and they do have some Rwandan riders, but out of 12 Rwandans currently listed on the start list, there is only one U23, and that kid is Shadrach Ufitimana, and he's untested in major races. He did finish 12th in the Tour of Sharjah, so he's kind of like the dark horse. He could come out of nowhere. The average age in the national team is 27. The Benediction team is 27.4. So I think
Wow.
good is that there's a lot of veterans who have raced the Tour of Rwanda, but also interesting, like, we don't have that young factor, that new up-and-coming rider from Rwanda. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
It's a good point though, isn't it? Like when you look at this race now with no Pro Conti teams, so a bunch of Devo teams for the World Tour, and they're all 18, 19, 20. It is a bit odd that Rwanda are fielding, as you say, like we always say, veteran riders in cycling are all sort of 29 to 30, but they've not gone with the U23 Devo riders that you kind of expect. If you're gonna put in these Devo teams for the World Tour, you want to give riders the chance to race against guys that look like them and same sort of age. So it does question a little bit what the strategy is there, but it's going to be tough, I think, with those guys. But as we said, because we just don't know how the Europeans are going to race. We'll turn to some of the other African nations as well. I mean, I think the first one I'd like to talk through a little bit is South Africa. There's no South African national team in the race. The invitation was shared with the Shinolo Pro Cycling team. So we have 5 riders from South Africa all on that team. We know the Shinoda guys pretty well. They turned up at Tour of Benin last year, and sort of wiped the floor with the race. Took every jersey, I think, in the race there as a club team, and then they've managed to get sponsorship from Shinolo, which is a large South African conglomerate. And they've just got their UCI Continental license for 2026. So congratulations to them, and actually we'll be launching a women's team for 2027 as well. So it's really great to see South Africa back in the world of UCI Conti teams. The one surprise, I suppose, is their big name is Reinhard Janse van Rensburg. Many years in World Tour level, amazing sprinter. But maybe just there's enough climbing in this that he's not their pick. So I think looking at their squads, there's a few riders there that we know a little bit untested. But you've got Emil van Niekerk in there, he's a really strong rider, and I think he's probably got to be their GC rider among that group. Breaking news. I mean, we were at this point going to talk about Algeria, represented by Madar Pro Cycling, who are the number one African pro team from 2025. But just as we started recording, we had a message from the Madar management saying, due to issues beyond their control, they will not be taking part in Tour of Rwanda. That's a real sad moment, right, Kim?
Definitely. I've just been thrilled seeing Madar's progress, especially in 2025. Didn't you say they had something crazy like 140 race days which for an Africa team is a lot of race days? They raced a lot, yeah, in Turkey. Hopefully it's not a permanent issue with them, and hopefully they get back on track and get their schedule lined up again, because they've been huge to promote Algerian cycling. Let's keep our fingers crossed that this is just a minor blip in the road. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of Ugandan kids who are in Team Amani. I call them kids because they are young. Paul Miro is the youngest rider currently without the full start list. I'm just going to preface that. But right now he's sitting as the youngest rider. He is the national champion junior road race for Uganda. He was second at the African Continental Championships road race. So I think if there's like any rider I'm super excited to see from Africa, it's this kid. I think he came out of the Masaka Cycling Club, who are great friends of Africa Rising Cycling and do a lot in Uganda. And then the other Ugandan on the Team Amani group is Shafiq Mugali. And he's more like, I don't know. He's done the Tour of Rwanda. He did it last year. He was 41st GC. And he was a DNF at the African Conti Champs and DNF at the World Champs. So who knows? Maybe he could have a good day. Speaking of, we don't know a lot about these riders, is the whole Ethiopian national team. We just literally right before this recording started, we got the list and sent it over to Pro Cycling Stats. And we did a quick deep dive into it. And there's one guy on there, Amro Mengestu, who was the junior national champ in 2024. But then there's no race data from 2025. I think maybe outside of an ITT national champ. I think rounding out our talk of African riders, we have to talk about this mysterious cock mix team, don't we, Jeremy?
Yeah, yes. So I kind of came out of left field in the last week or so. I mean, we don't really know the timing of it, but the UAE development team was due to take part in Tour of Rwanda. But looking on PCS a couple of weeks ago, they're also taking part in a race in Italy next week. So something went wrong in the communications clearly on that one. And we heard from various people that this CAC mix team has appeared in the race. And for those who don't know, CAC, as it's called, is the Confederation of African Cycling. So it's sort of the UCI's governing body across the top of the 54 African federations. At this point, honestly, we don't know who the riders are. We don't know who the DS is. Like, we've really got no information on that team. We've heard a few rumors that there are riders potentially from Senegal, Mali, Ghana, and maybe even Burkina Faso. So as soon as we hear any more on that, and the DS meeting is tomorrow night in Kigali, so once that happens, we'll get the proper roster. But it's an interesting development. I mean, obviously last year you did have the World Cycling Center mixed team. But that was a bunch of riders that obviously had been together for a long time. They'd been racing in Brittany and France, and they'd trained together. So this, I mean, from my opinion, for a 2.1 race to throw in a kind of mixed team of riders is a bit of a challenge. I really hope the riders they're putting into that team are riders that can mix it in the peloton that we're looking at and don't cause any troubles. I mean, it's obviously fantastic to have the opportunity to be in a 2.1. And Kim, we saw the Malians do really well in Benin, I think it was. Like they there's a couple of riders there that do have the chops at that kind of 2.2 level. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to see at a 2.1.
You made a really good point. There's a fine line between, stretching a rider and getting him to the next level to see what the next level is and completely demoralizing them. Or, it's like I saw that a lot at the World Championships. Yes, it was great to have some of these riders at the World Championships, but, getting out to the start line and being dropped within the first 5 kilometers of the road race doesn't do a lot for their morale and their belief level that they can progress. So I know working in Benin, I've always been very conscious of that. We were the same in Rwanda. Like we would stretch the riders. Going to the Tour of Rio pretty early on was a pretty big stretch. But they hung in there and they finished the race, which was kind of what we had hoped for at that point. So I don't know. I mean, you do have some guys, maybe if Paul Dumont from Burkina Faso shows up, he's raced in Europe, he's raced in the Olympics. The big thing though is you're putting guys in there with a lot of lack of experience. And I don't know, if I was a European pro, I might stay really far away from that team because it could get a little dicey with bike handling skills and stuff. I don't know. We'll wait and see. And like Jeremy said, when we get the list, we'll give it to you. But I would be interested if there's a rider from Senegal, because honestly, Senegal hasn't done much in decades. So I don't even know. And I don't even know like what kind of equipment they have. So we'll wait and see. So I have to ask you, Jeremy, as we wrap this up, who are your picks for this year, whether it's GC, stage wins, KOM, just anything?
I think I can't see myself going beyond Henok. He's a buddy, but I said to him a few weeks ago, I was like, I think 2026 is his year, right? I think this guy is he's raced a couple of Grand Tours, but I think you're going to see him at a Vuelta or a Tour de France, probably the Vuelta, but it's a big year for him at his age. And to win the Tour of Rwanda again at the start of 2026, I think I think every bone in his body is focused on that. And I can't see, unless some of these European teams really do race well. And obviously, you always forget that these Europeans race together as well. So a lot of these guys, if you look at the start list, right? Holland, Belgium, Germany, France, they all know each other. And if they're 18, 19, 20, they've probably raced together for 3 or 4 years. So there's going to be a lot of tactics going on. And I look at Henok. I think he's at least going to win a couple of stages. I think he's got to be the best shout for GC. I mean, I was actually texting with Stefan at PCS earlier, saying like, what's your call? The only other guy we haven't mentioned that he called out was Chow on one of the. Hang on, I screwed this up because I had it on my. Hang on, I'll start again in a second. I had it on my PCS and it's gone. So I was texting with Stefan a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned Pal Marty on the NSN team. So he's alongside Zach Marriage as well. He thinks he's a good shout for the racing, but I'm gonna leave him alone because we're talking about African riders. I would love to see Aman Eritrea do something. I think he's 23. This is a super important year for him as it's his first year really as a pro rider. So I think Awet is a big shout for me as well. But even again, I mentioned him before, Nahom Zerai. He's on Ukrio. It's a Japanese continental team, but for him to be national champ of Eritrea, strong rider. And maybe the outside shot is, you mentioned Paul Miro as well, right, from Uganda. Like, we just don't know with him, but he could be, if he can cope with the 80, 90 rider peloton and the kind of hit that gives you, like, and the experience. But what do you think? Where are you going to go?
No pressure, Henrik, but I feel like we have just piled on the weight of Africa onto Henrik's shoulders. So I'm almost afraid to say it. But you do bring up a good point. Like, I was going through the PCS top competitors list, and of course Henrik is number 1, and that Paul Marti from NSN is number 2. Mohawi Kudus is number 3. You never know, like, if he's feeling better. And then as I mentioned earlier with Bike Aid, I think we can't count out Oliver Matisse from Bike Aid, the German rider. I think he's hungry because I think he really felt that he could have been in GC on that last stage of the Tour of Rwanda last year that was canceled. I think he's coming back for a little, revenge or whatever you might call it. I think Samuel Nyankuru, definitely a solid top 10. And if he has his race legs in him from Team Amani, he could do well equally as well. And then Zach Marriage, I think we have to just wait and see with that kid, because he's also 16th sitting in top competitors. There's also, I pulled some information from Sudal team, Jose Cisneros. He's the Mexican junior champ. He was 17th at the World Championships road race. So, like you said, some of these young Europeans and South Americans and Mexicans that have raced in Europe, they know each other. So I think tactic-wise, they're coming to win this. Let's be honest, because if they win Tour of Rwanda, they get on the radar of their World Tour teams. If depending on how things go, we might be back later in the week to do a whole new recap and like realignment. We'll see. But yeah, I'm super excited about this. Thanks, Jeremy, for hosting this and all your insights. That's our comprehensive view of the 2026 Tour of Rwanda. We will share results and any interesting stories on all our social media during the race. Twitter is definitely where you can catch more live updates, and we'll also put the information on the YouTube channel to follow the race. And please do share this podcast with your friends. Leave us a review. Make sure you follow us, because that allows us to give all this great information and continue telling these stories. And hopefully we'll have some interviews with some of these riders at the end of the tour.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Africa Rising Cycling Podcast. If you like what you have heard, please do share our podcast with your friends and on social media. Leave us a review or even make a donation to Africa Rising Cycling. All of this will help us to continue to bring you fascinating stories about African cycling.